Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back. As you know, we have a really great guest today. He is about to publish, or he has at this point, his 7th Kickstarter. We love talking comic books, so this is a good creator interview we got coming up. We got Trevor Fernandes Lenkiewicz. I probably butchered that, but he's coming on to talk a few things. So first things first, as always, make sure you subscribe, share with a friend, all of that good stuff, help the podcast grow. And my personal sponsored unofficial beer this week is from Weldworks Brewing Company yet again. It is the Pineapple Upside Down Cake Sour. It is brewed with pineapple, almonds, milk sugar, vanilla beans, and vanilla cake mix. There's just a lot going on in this beer. I don't know why I was feeling bougie today. I felt like it was the vibe today. Today was like a bougie vibe. And so that's what I went with. It is from Weldworks Brewing, canned in Greeley, Colorado, which always makes me think of one of my old time favorite bands like Greeley States from back in the day. Any of my scene kids from back in the day. And this comes at 5.7%. So Lauren, what you got?
I'm drinking an Ellipsis beer. This was actually released on May the 4th, but it's not a Star Wars beer. It is a Spaceballs beer. It is called Great Helmet. It is a double New England, and it has Mosaic and YQH 1320. So, and it's at 8.1%. I've been seeing a few more breweries these days putting hops on there that don't have legit names. So I don't know if those are new strains or new popularized strains. I mean, they're all made up.
They're like, we all just put a bunch.
Stuff. But we need some fun. I mean, I think they need to make some fun names for them. I think we also should name the yeast strains more fun names. Like outside of like Kvik, I think that's the only yeast strain I can name. And that's only because it ferments really fast.
Listen, you and my wife are like the two people on earth that just love to name everything. Me, I don't like name anything. They're like, have you named this yet? Have you named that? I mean, I can't even name like my own pets or kids, let alone.
Just say where your kids like just called like Baby Boy Roth for like the first month.
No, to be fair, they were picked out well beforehand on account of the Green Arrow. Fun fact. So that's kind of how they got their names. But yeah, interesting. I do agree that I feel like we're just making stuff up now because it's why not? You can do so many different.
I mean, all words are made up.
That's true. That is true. And speaking of words that are made up on a page in a print, we have Trevor here tonight, a fantastic comic book creator, here to talk about some things that he's done. So Trevor, welcome to the show. What are you drinking tonight?
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Matt and Lauren. It's a pleasure. I am sacrilegiously to say, I guess, not the biggest beer guy, but I am a bourbon guy. So I have a little Four Roses single barrel. Percentage wise, we're cooking at 49% alcohol.
I was gonna kick our percentage.
Listen, I love a lot of things in this world. Bourbons are absolutely one of those things. If I'm not drinking a beer, honestly, more often than not, I'm drinking a good bourbon or something along those lines on the weekend at home. So I can get behind that.
What's your go-to home bottle?
Oh man, my home bottle is always from this one back home. It was called Flag Hill Distillery, so I get that sent back home. But I also love like Climax, theirs, and then a good old fashioned, Jack Daniel's is kind of just old fashioned, or anything that kind of is brewed and distilled here. I went to Koenig Distillery out here. I live in Idaho, which is a big wine spot apparently, and so I went and I've been picking up some of their bottles of their Seven Devils. Their straight rye whiskeys and things this weekend. So I've been kind of sipping on some local stuff, things like that, just because I'm going to be moving soon. And I love trying new things. Like obviously I go back to the old reliables. Yeah, man, if I go to a new area that has something local right there, that's one of my favorite things to grab. And then big tequila guy. So I do love tequila. And then Terramana, honestly, and Casamigos are like my two tequila go-tos.
You like Hollywood tequila.
Yeah.
Hollywood tequila.
I do. Look, I'm yeah.
See, I only like the liquor in a barrel surrounding my beer. Like I like bourbon barrel aged beers. I think are phenomenal. But I think it'd be dangerous when you get into bourbon.
Have you ever had a bourbon aged coffee?
No.
Oh, it's so.
I've had bourbon aged maple syrup. Now that's good,
dude. You can age. You can age pretty much anything in a bourbon barrel, man. Like some of my favorite. There's this great coffee I had in New York City when I was back there in October. And it was like a bourbon barrel aged coffee, and it was freaking lovely. I also love bourbons that are aged in dark rum casks.
Oh, yeah.
They're really, really pleasant. Like, I think it's Angel's Envy. Their dark rye is finished in a rum cask, and it's lovely. It's so good.
That sounds really good. Yeah, I love aging things. Coffee, I haven't tried. I'm a big coffee person too. I love different kinds of coffees and things. So I've never tried a bourbon. That's going to be on my list. I'm probably going to go buy some, like hit up Google or something and be like, hey, what can I get sent to me? That sounds pretty good. So solid. Hell yeah, man.
Where are you moving to?
I'll be going to Norfolk, Virginia.
Oh,
so nice. I'm hoping as I go through Kentucky, maybe we hit up the bourbon trail as I drive through Kentucky from this side of the country. Got to make a road trip. You know, you got to make it worthwhile when you go through these places.
I've thought about it. I've thought about something like that where next year I was thinking about taking the Helix project to direct market just to see how that would go and kind of dabble my feet. And, you know, Diamond is desperate for new accounts after losing the big two. So, you know, I thought about once we dropped that first issue in the DM, I was thinking about doing like a signing tour, mostly as a work excuse to go drive down to the Bourbon Trail.
They're all tax write-offs, man.
I don't know if that makes me a pragmatic business person or an alcoholic, but either way, I'm kind of down.
Look, the way we feel it, because we always on our business exclusive. Yeah, our business ventures, going to Comic-Cons and things like that. We plan our vacations and things around, hey, what breweries they got? Have we been here? Have we tried this stuff? So, you know, that's just smart thinking.
I actually saw that you were at MegaCon recently. Mm-hmm. So I live in Orlando, so I was at MegaCon. Did you try any of the beers? Because they were all barrel-aged beers.
No. I'm MegaCon. Man, that show, it's so busy and so businessy.
It was a bit of a shit show on Saturday.
Yeah. Oh my God. If my handler didn't have a different cell company than I did, I would have been screwed. Like there's no internet connection in that building. And even if you have service, like visually speaking on your drop down menu, it's just not functional sometimes.
Yeah.
And that was tough. But what I was getting at was that show's so busy. I'm really only drinking if it's like am I having like a dinner with, like, is it a business thing? You know, although I did have a Wagyu burger for the first time in Orlando. That was great.
I don't even know what that is.
It's made with like Japanese Wagyu beef. That's part of like the blend. And it's as a steak, I think one of the most coveted beefs on the face of the planet.
It's very expensive.
Yeah. And so I was like, well, I make comics, so I can't afford to have a Wagyu steak, but I can give a Wagyu burger a shot, and that was really, really good.
Nice. I probably don't know because I don't eat beef. I thought maybe it was something exclusive to Orlando that I had just been missing out on.
I mean,
but I you know what? Since you live in Orlando, honestly, after we record, I would love to get some of your favorite spots because I feel like I never get solid recommendations in Orlando. It's always
like touristy.
Yeah, and I hate the touristy stuff. Like the best part about doing all these conventions is talking to locals and asking like, where do I go to get like the hole in the wall, like mom and pop food? You know what I mean? Like some of my favorite places in New York are like little like halal spots that are in these tiny corners or in a food truck, and they come recommended by everybody, and everything is served to you either in styrofoam or in aluminum, but it's just going to be like the most flavorful thing you've had all month for like $10. Like,
right.
That's what I'm looking for, because then you know it's all in the food. Like the presentation's irrelevant because it's all in the food. So I will have to get your recommendations for spots to go to in Orlando.
I can definitely do that. I can definitely point you in the right direction of beer too. Even though I know you're a bourbon drinker, but
I got you on the other things. Don't worry. I got you on the good bourbons. And then in New England, I'm from Boston originally, so I can get you the good
some springs to go
good
to.
Things up there too. But
dude, I was just in Boston for Wicked Comic-Con actually.
Oh, were you? I missed you by like a week then because I was there the week prior, back home visiting family, and I literally left like that week before. So it's too funny. Yeah.
So shout out to you, Wicked Comic-Con in Boston.
Is it really called Wicked Con?
Yeah, it was Wicked Con. Yeah,
that's so funny.
This past April, and then they do the Fan X because Fan Expo does all theirs. So they're doing the Fan Expo with all the bigger guests. That's usually the bigger one, of course, because it's got your Hayden Christensen's, like your big A-list actors. Which I wish, I'm going to cut this out, so I don't mind saying it, but I wish they would focus more on comic creators with Fan X, which I feel like is something they haven't really done. Like when we did Fan X out in Salt Lake last year. Wasn't a lot of comic creators. Seattle, surprisingly, they actually focused on it there. We had, Jackson Lansing, a lot of those big time creators. But yeah, for the most part,
MegaCon did pretty good this year.
MegaCon, I feel like always does pretty good, but MegaCon just has like like an insane scale where they just have a lot of everything. Mm-hmm. But I definitely get the criticism. I did Fan Expo New Orleans in January, and nobody was there for comics. Like,
yeah, it's wild.
If I didn't, I pretty much got bailed out. Like, if it were just con attendees, that show would have actually been a loss. I got saved due to a couple of like retailers and like online sellers that all took interest in me and bought a lot of my books. But if it wasn't for them, that show would have been like totally in the red, because everybody and their mom was there to meet. I forget the name of his character, but he got really viral for playing a Master of Puppets cover on Stranger Things.
Oh yeah.
It was like his
kid Eddie.
Eddie Munson. Yeah.
It was his first U.S. appearance, and so everybody and their moms was there for him. And then they walked past me, and they're like, "Oh, what do you do?" And you explain it to them. It's like, "Oh, are you with like a Marvel or DC?" It's like, "No, I'm independent. Like I don't answer to a corporation." And they're like, "Oh, cool, okay." And then he just like
sucks too, because like I get like the appeal. You want to draw as many people into your convention as possible, but like, don't just bring actors. Like we're kind of losing sight of this was once, a great comic convention. Like these Comic Cons were born from comic creators at a point. Like that's all you saw. And then actors and actresses started coming, which is great because I love meeting some of these people too. But let's also continue to give love. And then also it kind of sucks. Like people just think that there's two big companies out there when there's so much great work being done in the comic book industry, period. That's just like, just because it's not Marvel or DC doesn't mean it's not a good story. Honestly, most of the comics that we've read in doing through
we've had a lot of phenomenal Kickstarter comics, 100%. Including the one we're about to talk about in a minute, your Area 51, the Helix Project.
Yes.
I read that today. So that's a 6-issue sci-fi thriller. And I'm going to let you actually tell us a little bit about it beforehand. But I never know what we're going to get when we get the Kickstarter comics on here. It's like, we've had a couple Marvel people on here that have written for DC, and you have an idea what you're going to get. So, and for the most part, we've been pleasantly surprised. And I really, really like this one. So why don't you tell us a little bit about this one? And you said some of your inspiration was very personal. So if you want to give us some background on that as well, and just kind of tease this sci-fi thriller.
For sure. Thank you for the kind words, by the way. That really means a lot. This was my first comic book series ever. I went to school for molecular biology, and now I make comic books. So it was a huge shift in identity for me. And so logically, the first choice was to write this book about identity. And it's a 6-issue sci-fi thriller, as Lauren said, about a half extraterrestrial boy who's driven into the jaw of a Cold War genetics conspiracy project deep beneath Area 51 in order to solve the mystery, or to uncover the truth, I should say, surrounding his father's murder. And ultimately, he is forced to face a twisted ghost from his past that challenges everything he knows about himself and what it means to be human. At the end of the day, yes, it's a cool sci-fi story, shape-shifting aliens, government conspiracy. But at its core, it is deeply personal. It's a story about identity and reconciling that with memory and with loss. They're very human themes that I think anybody can relate to. And it might be on a different angle. But for me, I was writing that story because I thought I knew where my life was going. As a young guy going to school, seems like a safe career. It was certainly a socially favorable career, right? It sounds complicated. And then, I end up getting invited by CB Cebulski to apply for an editorial internship sort of out of the blue. That's an interesting story. And then suddenly I'm like, oh, I can make comics. I can do the comic thing for a living. And I interviewed there in March of 2020. And it was the week that hand sanitizer and toilet paper was selling out everywhere. And lockdown happened, and that opportunity kind of went away. And several months later, I was just like, after crying about it for 6 months, I was like, you don't know how much you want something until it's gone. And I could not see myself going back to looking down a microscope and being condescended to by a couple of MDs at Yale. And so I don't know. I took the leap. I was just like, nobody's going to tell me that I can't do what I want to do. And we launched the first issue of the Helix Project, and that came out in January of 2021. And from that point on, it was like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it right. And yeah.
I was just going to say, so your microbiology education, though, I feel like had to have had some impact on this story, because whether you're obviously, I mean, we see it, with Cisco and the Flash and all these comic books, they take real science and they spin it to make, Flash go super fast and make his costume not combust and into flames the second he starts running. And there was some definite, whether it was fake or real or a combo of both, like you knew the words to use, that had to have been from your microbiology background, I'm assuming.
Yeah. So my focus was actually molecular genetics, although the degree was in molecular and cellular biology. And so, when I went to write, the first piece of advice I was told by anybody that I admire was write what you know. And so I had spent a small fortune learning about cells and protein pathways. And it made a lot of sense, right? Because I told that story in a time where I had no idea. Can I swear? Is swearing a thing? I had no idea who the fuck I was. I was like a 21-year-old kid, 22-year-old kid, who thought his life was going to go one way and thought that way for a long time. And suddenly something comes up and it's not like first of all, it's a grind, right? Like I decided to walk away from a not convenient, but a pretty much a guaranteed 6-figure salary, benefits, an element of prestige to.
It's a safe choice, especially in today's kind of, economy, if you will, how everything's so expensive. It's expensive to be alive, right?
If it makes you feel better, I'm a licensed attorney who writes articles for Disney as like a freelance writer. So,
dude, but it's just like it speaks to the point that like if you have a good enough head on your shoulders, you can make a living doing what you want to do. And it was not favorable from the outside for most people. And in the beginning, it's a slog, right? You're begging people to read the material. And there is also the perception that like, when people start making comics, they might not be the most professional right out the gate. And for me, I really, really wanted to push against that. I told myself if I didn't think I was capable of producing something that could compete on a craft level with anything you buy on a shelf, then there's no point in doing it for me.
Mm-hmm.
And we ironed something out that I think grew and changed and evolved as I did along the way. The writer that I was by issue 6, was dramatically better than the writer I was at issue 1. And I think that also plays to my education a little bit, because I was taught to think like a scientist. I was taught to be dissective and break things down into their constituent parts. And so I always say like the difference between me and most other creatives are that I filter my creativity through a magnifying glass, right? Like I'm breaking things down into these pieces and figuring out how I can jigsaw them together to create something that feels more like my own and it has my signature and my brand. And that's kind of where that story came from. Like I told a story about a boy that ultimately had to figure out who he was in the face of a world that not only was telling him who to be and how to be it, but didn't want him there. And that all kind of stemmed from that insecurity for myself and that major sort of tipping point that came with that job offer and with the pandemic in my early 20s.
No, obviously with any comic book writer today, whether you're writing for Marvel, DC, Image, or Kickstarter, we see pieces from all these other comic book stories, from Jack Kirby to Stan Lee to, even people today. What are some of your inspirations? Because there were things I picked up multiple things in reading this. Multiple characters reminded me of other people, but were different. No, nothing was, exactly the same as what, but I saw so much just deep cuts. So and obviously I know Jack Kirby's an inspiration because you did quote him in one of the comics. So who are some of your inspirations that you loved as a comic book reader before you started writing that helped you create this story?
Well, the number one is always like Alan Moore, and the amount of deliberation in his work, every panel mattering and having a different output for the reader, depending on what context you read it in. I think the beautiful thing about Watchmen, in and of it just being Watchmen, is that it gets better every time because you're reading into another layer. You're accessing something that you didn't before because now you have a more basal understanding of the context that sets it up. And so that was a deliberate thing. That's what I really wanted to pull into the best of my ability is having deliberation and making sure that everything matters and that it can hopefully, I'm not the judge of this, but I'm hoping that it's something that people can read multiple times and get something new out of. So that was absolutely massive. In a broad sense, it was him. On a thematic level, I grew up watching like the Dwayne McDuffie DC animated stuff. And that bled into me eventually trying out the Milestone stuff. And although it's not, I think he's lauded for writing a lot about civil rights and things of that nature. But ultimately, it makes me think about identity in the way that like identity of a large group of people were perceived by their environment and how they perceived their place in the world. And so while I can't write about those specific experiences because they don't apply to me, I can take the spirit of that in many ways and talk about what this character's identity meant for him. So I definitely pulled thematic inspiration from Dwayne McDuffie. Tone wise, it's hard not to pull from Brubaker and Phillips. They're considered the top of the crime food chain. Although I would argue now, in retrospect, I think I did sort of mismarket that a little bit because I think more of my crime influence actually comes from the team of Brian Azzarello and Eduardo Risso. Yeah. The more that I think about it, because Brubaker does a lot of the stoic hero, and I don't think I have that in me to do the stoic hero. Like I want a really emotionally damaged character that I can really play with and grow along with. And so I think Azzarello kind of captures that a little bit more for me. And also, to be fair, like his Batman Broken City was like very quintessential reading for me when I first got into comics. And I reread that the other day, or realistically like a month and a half ago for another interview where we talked about the comics that influenced us. And I was like, oh, like I knew it was an influence, but I didn't realize how much, just like the moodiness and a little bit of the sort of more floral descriptive language or the sensationalism of it in a way, not in like a grand sense, but like there are moments where like he personifies Gotham through this sort of sensational poetic language. And there are ways that I realized I definitely pulled from in like the motif of this hollow echoing thunder, throughout Kent's life, so on and so forth. So I didn't give them enough credit back when I was crowdfunding these books, but they were definitely a big influence.
Well, and I will say, because obviously I don't want to ruin anything, I would just want to tease it. It's not black and white at all. And I think the best stories aren't. And I think more people are realizing that The Boys is a good example. Like nobody's good, nobody's bad. They're all a little bit evil. And I loved that you really played with is innocence pure or is it naive kind of thing. So I thought that was great. You got, everybody's tortured in some way or another. And I think that reflected in all of the characters.
I appreciate that. I really do appreciate that because my goal with that first book was having a tight cast that I could hopefully have the reins on. It was my first book and I wanted every character to matter and I wanted every character to have their own personality and not have it be so cut and dry. A lot of those characters too are mirrors of Kent. Like the M or Marissa is definitely like a what if. There's a moment in issue 5 where we have if you open, it's harder to see because I know you guys read it digitally, but there's a sequence of memories between these two characters, and when you open the page, it's not a spread, but they're designed to be symmetrical to one another when you open the book. And so you have this memory of Kent and his mother moving away from home after his father got shot. And then you have the memory of Marissa coming home to no mother. And so it is, a lot of these characters in many ways are meant to reflect Kent and things that he fears and things that he's insecure about in many ways. And some of those characters turn it into their strength, right? Like M developed this ruthless pragmatism and agency that he didn't have. And then, you look at the Winters character and, so on and so forth. I don't want to get too far without spoiling it, but I really appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's fantastic.
I think that's what I love too is, I hate when things, I don't always hate when things are necessarily cut and dry, because life isn't necessarily black and white. There's a lot of morally gray areas, if you will. And I think that's what, you did really great in this book, is kind of reflecting that. And it, to me as a reader, it kind of pulls me in even more, because you can look and see aspects of even ourselves in some of this stuff in here.
Yeah, I thank you, man. I wanted this book to be relatable. It stemmed from a very personal, very specific experience, but I thought that these themes were things that people have to face every day. And people, I think the most fascinating thing about traveling, about getting to meet people at these conventions and these signings, are that, most of the time somebody is highlighting a scene or a moment that wasn't like it wasn't like the punchline for me. It wasn't the delivery, with them. Right. And that to me is fascinating. Like I had the privilege of meeting a former war veteran, and a very, very big supporter of mine. And he had mentioned that there was the moment, like from issue 2 on, where he saw that like Kent had an incredible amount of potential, but lacked agency, and was very much constantly put on pause because of his insecurity and who he was. And he said like he could relate to it with his post-traumatic stress disorder. And like that really, that really, really affected me moving forward, because then it made me realize like every moment, and I always tried to operate on the idea that every moment mattered, but that really hammered it home.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And to know that you made, with your art and what meant something to you, you made somebody else feel something. Now, before we go into your new one that's about to launch, which we just got a tease about, I do want to ask, because this was, supernatural-esque, this was sci-fi-esque. Are there any influences, or, as a geek podcast, we love all sorts of different geeky things. So outside of comic books, was there any sci-fi or supernatural that you loved growing up, even if it didn't directly influence it, but just kind of influences your creativity overall?
It's hard to say, because I grew up with like 28 channels of basic cable, and like as a child was not much of like a movie or TV show guy. In college, certainly like one of my best friends is an absolute film junkie, and so he changed that. He honestly probably changed my life, because now I have a taste now because I've been exposed to so much more. But it's weird. But like I said, the influences for me in that story were largely thematic and technical. I've heard a lot over the course of the last 2 years, people making comparisons to X-Files, which I haven't seen. Like I said, I didn't really have much for cable. But I'm sure at some point I will sit down and see what all of the comparisons are about. But I have the unfortunately like the most non-answer possible in that.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
There's a lot of alien stories and whatnot too. You mentioned Watchmen, obviously, Dr. Manhattan, and there's a lot of, there's so many aliens now. Years ago, the mainstream was just Spider-Man, and the only alien we knew was Superman. But yeah, now we know many aliens, so you don't need to have another response.
I guess a part of it was, if I'm honest too, when I think about it, I remember around that time I was very frustrated with DC, and it was like, I really want a good Martian Manhunter book. Like, why don't we have a good Martian Manhunter title that explores his ability as this very mutable shapeshifter? Like a big influence.
I would love to have a good backstory of his too. Like, give him the full attention he deserves.
And there's a moment too in Darwin Cook's New Frontier where you have these like interstitial cuts to Martian Manhunter in front of the TV, like learning about human culture through the lens of like American television, and he's shapeshifting into all of these iconic awesome. These iconic characters, and these, and I found that fascinating, because I thought that there were a lot of like psychological and emotional implications of this character who feels like they have to be mutable in order to survive. And I didn't quite take that theme literally and convert it over, but it got me thinking about the thematic complications of a character who could shapeshift at any moment, and why would they want to do that? And and then I also got to put another spin on it, because not only does this character not only does this character feel like he can't be himself, but he hates what he is. He finds it monstrous. Like, you look at one of the covers for issue 2 with like the puzzle pieces and the ravenous alien, like that was his reflection of himself. That was how he thought about his heritage, because despite him hating the people that persecuted his father because he was an extraterrestrial, he also saw the extraterrestrial heritage is the thing that got his father killed. So it's just this very complicated relationship that he has with himself. And I guess in a way, some of that did come from like the fact that I was like, man, give John Jones a good book.
Yes, I agree. Do a movie on him. Come on, James Gunn. Let's do this.
Yeah, and I'll write it, Jimmy. So,
perfect. So you mentioned the art. How was that working with the artist? Because I always imagine that's going to be a little bit more difficult for a Kickstarter to go back and forth. Did you feel your ideas? Because the art's phenomenal, especially when you go into a little bit of the memories. You got that black and white with the splatter of red. So was the artist coming back and you were like, yes, that's it? Or was there a lot of back and forth?
There was a back and forth, but it's because I keep my hands in all the cookie jars, for better, for worse. And I think very visually, like I don't know if you got a chance when you got through issue 6 to read like some of the script that was in that behind the scenes feature, but I do a lot of visual directing in the scripts. And I usually go into scenes with an understanding of how I want to frame it, visually speaking. And so, yeah, there was a lot of that. There was a lot of like being turned in roughs and having notes and just trying to fine tune it. But to that degree, I was also never really like a control freak about it, or I try not to be. My thing is always my notes at the top of the script, because I write to every member of the team at the top of the script, is like best idea wins. Like if I have something that doesn't work, do something else and tell me why it doesn't work. And sometimes you're going to be right, and sometimes I'm going to be right. Like speaking about the first issue, that double page spread, which is arguably the climax in the memory, right? You see how Kent had lost his father. The artist really did not want to do silhouettes on the figures of Roswell and the officer. And I was like, no, we're doing this. So like, I was like, I can't imagine this scene without this stark contrast of these figures and like that bright rim lighting around their form, as just like it pauses time. It's going to force somebody to sit and chew on that moment. And then you also have, the one, like you said, there's one color in that grayscale panel, and it's to me, it just creates this very striking, dramatic moment. And he didn't want to do it. So that was one of the moments where I had to put my foot down. But there are other moments where, like in issue 6, there's a double page spread where there's like a surprising piece of action. And I had a very specific direction for that page. It was like we're shooting it from a distance at the ground level, tilted up. And Sam, the brilliant artist and storyteller that he is, the first rough that he sends me is this, like, it's still a full shot, but it's much tighter because you're shooting it from above, right? So you don't have to have as much in the way of like vertical wasted space. It's super tight, and it's just very intimate, and it forces somebody to confront the violence and the cruelty of the moment. And like that was way better than anything I could have written in the script in terms of the way he was visually directing that story. So it's sort of osmotic. I don't know if I properly answered your question.
No, I think you did. I think you actually answered it way more than most.
Yeah.
That's one of our standard comic book interviewer questions. And yeah, that was the best answer I've gotten. Well, usually I get like, oh yeah, it was great. Or, well, and then that's about it. So
yeah, I mean, I was fortunate that we found Sam, because I did have an artist who did the first 4, and Marcelo, collaborating with him was a very unique experience, and I learned a lot from it. And I didn't, over the course of the 4 issues, I didn't think there was as much mutual growth in the relationship or in the storytelling. And so when I linked up with Sam and Sam did those last 2 issues, I think him and I really clicked, and both of us on a creative level just kind of exploded. Like I cite issue 5 as the moment where I feel like I became a good comic book writer. Because even though like the story didn't change, the way we could deliver that story changed, and that 100% influences the finished product in a big way. And even further, and we'll get into it later, the story that Sam and I are doing, which you guys got a preview to in the Minutes to Midnight collection, is something where we take that to a whole nother level and just get experimental. Like I think I'm entering like my vertigo phase of creating. So I'm just going to go nuts.
Nice. Yeah. Cause I just always wonder, like, obviously you have these pictures in your head. So how do you get that on paper when you personally are not the, not the illustrator? So speaking of that, let's go into the next one. But before, if somebody wanted to read Area 51, the Helix Project today, where can they go and grab that?
So you could go to my website, which is darkknightnation.com/shop. If you find me on any socials at Pocket Watch Press, there will always be a link tree that will then give you the option to go to my shop. However, by the time you might be watching this, we may or may not have launched the Kickstarter to my next project, Minutes to Midnight, in which, if you so choose, you will be able to catch up and snag all of the Helix project through that campaign, which I would recommend doing, because then you get to get on the ground floor of my next project and support in the most direct way possible, and also have access to way more perks than I would be able to give you if you were to just buy something on my website. So, yeah.
Nice. So yes, Minutes to Midnight, the hour between life and death. So tell us a little bit about this one that's about to launch.
Yeah, so I'm incredibly excited. It's a 64-page collection of graphic short stories, all ranging in genre and in content, and even in the volume, right? Like, so Reflections and Other Little Devils, which you guys got a little 7-page preview to, that's a 22-page story. Like, that could have been a single issue on its own. It started as a 10-page story, but look where we are now. Anywho, I had always sort of toyed with the idea of doing a collection that has something to do with my little publishing label, Pocket Watch Press. And so I thought about the implications of time and how I could relate theme to time. And so, of course, my first installment in this sort of annual series was Midnight. The death of the old day, the beginning of a new one. It can either be, it's like it's in limbo. And the thing that I thought about most was perspective, in a broad sense, right? Like, you can either go into a new day holding grudges and holding on to negativity and sour emotions, or you can go into it clear-headed. Like Midnight and that late, you're either provided with late night clarity, or that's when you text your really toxic ex-partner and ruin the next 6 months of your life, right? Like, there is no in between. And so I really wanted to play around with that. And also, as a younger creator, I really, really wanted to hedge against the idea of being typecast. I love the Helix Project. I love sci-fi. I love what I did, but I don't want to be the sci-fi guy. I don't want to be the alien guy. I don't want to be the conspiracy guy. I want to be the guy that can be looked at to tell a really great emotional and personal story. And so part of the impetus behind Minutes to Midnight was wanting to tell different types of stories, flex creative muscles that I feel like I was building over the course of the Helix Project, and also just work with a bunch of really talented people, because as much as this is a creative process, it's also a huge lesson in how people collaborate, how they think, how they process sort of creative direction, and how I'm able to learn and become better as a collaborator. And so, yeah, we have 4 stories in this collection, ranging from little 6-pagers to 22 pages. So I really wanted to take the opportunity to let these stories breathe and be as long or as short as I felt they needed to be in order to be the best version of themselves. And so here we are, telling stories that all are somewhat related to this idea of perspective.
So are these, because you're going to have different short stories, are they going to have any Easter eggs with each other? Is there going to be any connection? Or are they all going to be completely different short stories?
So for now, they're all completely different. There is one short story in there that I plan on making syndicated throughout the next couple of these collections that I do. And so that may change. But for now, they're all pretty separate. I really wanted to focus on the individual storytelling. I think sometimes when creatives get caught up in building out connective tissue between stories, they forget about the stories themselves. And at the end of the day, I wanted to create 4 really tight stories that showed off my ability, or I should say the abilities that I've gained over the course of the Helix project, my collaborators' abilities, and my versatility as a creative force and a creative voice in the industry. So yeah, that may change, but for now, I didn't want to bite off more than I could chew by feeling like I needed to
create a universe.
Right. Yeah. And I think a lot of indie guys get really caught up in that and they lose their stories, quite frankly. Like, I respectfully to them, I actually sometimes get a little annoyed when I see like a big, like if I see a Kickstarter and the first thing it mentions in that little subtitle is like a new universe is born. And I'm like, that's great. But like, how, like, I don't care about the universe if I don't care about the story and the characters in those stories. Yeah. And so I'm the opposite of that. I mean, and it really comes through in the last story in this collection that it's for me, it's about the personal implications and the ways that I can kind of connect to a reader on a very personal level.
Well, and just reading those few pages you sent us, where that there really wasn't, like you said, it was a teaser, but I want to know what the hell Rosa did to him. I was like, this guy's got some PTSD. He is done with people's bullshit. And Rosa did something to him. Yeah. So it was a nice little tease.
I'm so hyped for everybody to read that story. Sam is absolutely knocking it out of the park. Like I said, that story is really it speaks the most of the notion that I was bringing up earlier about being experimental and playing with the reading experience and the design of the page. There's a little thing that I'll tell people to kind of look for as they read it, is that there's this idea that you have as this character is solving this crime that takes place in my hometown, by the way.
I noticed that.
As he's kind of solving this crime that's been unfolding over the course of 20 years, memories of the rise and fall of his marriage are sort of juxtaposed throughout. And those memories are all reflected in artifacts of tragedy. And so we really get into the way we frame the story on a visual level and using that not only as a tonal device, but as a thematic element, right? Like, what happens if this marriage is only framed in artifacts of tragedy? Well, then that speaks to the marriage. It speaks to the relationship that spawns out of the marriage for those two characters, and somehow relates it to this suicide that this detective is solving. And so, yeah, we like I said, the only way I can possibly describe it is we went nuts and took a big swing.
And now, will all these stories, if somebody invests in the Kickstarter, can you invest in individual ones, or are you investing in the whole collection of the short stories?
It's the whole thing. It's 64 pages. It's toothsome. I think, most people will enjoy at least 3 out of 4 of them at a time. I tried to kind of attack it from different angles. I mean, there's even like one of the stories in there I would even be comfortable handing to a child. Now that story will evolve and probably become a little bit darker as that character comes of age, because that is the syndicated story. But yeah, it's kind of it's all or nothing, but it also enables me to give a lot of bang for your buck on Kickstarter, where, people are charging $20 for a 20 to 24 page floppy. I'm giving you a 64 page book for that same price. And so, yeah. And I also think, not that I can tell people what they should read or how they should read it, but I think it's cool because it gives people maybe the opportunity to come in because they're interested in one of those genres or one of those styles of stories, or maybe 2 of them. And hopefully, hopefully get them exposed to something else. Cause I find that like the way that I access stories have totally changed the more open-minded I've become. There's a point in my life where I would have told you that I liked a specific style of storytelling or a specific angle. And now I don't really care what it is, as long as it's got great characters that
story,
and that ultimately have to face an obstacle that challenges who they are deeply as a person, beyond just a physical conflict.
100%. And when is this one dropping?
So this drops Monday, May 22nd. So It's probably around the time that this interview goes live. And we've got a lot of really cool rewards. Some backers actually from the Helix Project were able to get drawn in to this project. So we have a lot of cool opportunities like that,
nice.
Along with, some early bird discounts for people that get in the first couple days. You can get the books at a discounted price, bundles. One of the things we do are like comic art prints. And actually one of the things that I just got in today is a cool like foil print of one of the sort of raw pages from Reflections. Nice. And so I don't sell these outside of Kickstarters. So just like a lot of perks like that to get people in on the ground floor.
Do you have any Comic-Cons you're coming up that you'll be at?
Oh boy, so many. So I'll be at Heroes Con in Charlotte in June.
Oh, right.
I'll be at Terrificon in Connecticut in July. In August, I think I'll be at Fan Expo Canada. September, I have Baltimore Comic-Con and then the Memphis Comic Expo. And then October, I'll be in New York. And then November, I'll be at Thought Bubble in the UK.
Damn, you're busy. That's awesome.
Believe it or not, I just came back. I did so for early April into basically the end of the month, I had done 3 shows in 5 weeks. So it was MegaCon,
exhausting,
Wicked, and then I did the Calgary Expo out in Western Canada.
We had a friend who just did the Calgary Expo, Lori, with the ASAP Imagination. She was up there doing her stuff. That's cool. It's funny that like people we know were so close, and then even you and Lauren were at the.
Yeah, I know. When I saw the MegaCon 2023 picture, I was like, oh crap, we should have done this interview a few months ago.
Yeah. But hey, we're here now. Now we know for next year.
There you go. Yeah, I will. Don't see why I wouldn't be at MegaCon next time. I think it's first weekend in February.
I'll be at the Raleigh Comic-Con, Richmond Comic-Con, and Washington DC cons next year. So those are 3 that I know for sure that I'll be at. And
I'm definitely looking at potentially doing the Galaxy Con down there. So hopefully we'll be able to meet up if that's the case.
We definitely will, because I'll be living an hour away from the Richmond one, and then my in-laws live in Raleigh for the Galaxy Con, down there, and so I will make it a point to get out there so we can link up and hopefully have a good glass of bourbon together.
Listen, I'm down.
Some fancy beef, which I already forgot the name.
It's okay. The bourbon is what mattered the most.
Exactly. And we really appreciate you taking the time out to come and hang out with us and sharing the inspirations behind your work, talking to how you got into it. I mean, for somebody who's relatively new to the game, you wouldn't know it by reading these
No,
stories
not at all.
And diving in and the way that you've just taken to it. Some people have natural talent, and without a doubt, we're no experts by any means, but we've done this enough, and we've talked to enough, and we've read enough comic books that it's just like you can tell when somebody has the natural talent, and it's definitely there with you. And I can't wait to read more of what you have coming out, without a doubt.
Oh, thank you. No, it means the world. It's like I'd never take those types of compliments for granted, because it's just like a year and some change ago, it's like begging people to read this stuff.
And 3 years ago, your life was completely different. So, I
mean, 3 years ago, I wasn't doing any of this. It's so I'm deeply, deeply grateful to hear that. And it's what I shoot for every go around, man. Like I have a philosophy that, in order to keep a strong mind and a strong ethic, you need to keep lofty goals. And I always say, like, I want to be one of the best in the world at what I do. And it's not hyperbole. It's not it's not like the hyper masculine sort of competitive element. It is like, to me, I love what I do. I believe in what I'm capable of if I stay hungry. And I want to be remembered 20 years from now as a guy that might have defined a generation of comic book writers. And that is a huge goal. There are very few people who have done that. But, it's the notion that, at the end of the day, I want to tell stories that connect and relate to people on a deeply personal level, despite, playing around with the grandeur of genre. I think genre is a tool to be more personal and to amplify, those elements. And so just to speak on what you were saying is like, it means a lot when I can hear that something I made connects with somebody else, probably on a different level than it connected with me when I made it. And so thank you for saying that.
But I mean, yeah, we all go into anything with everything we've experienced. And so we're thinking about all of those things whenever, we read anything, whether it's for entertainment or anything else. So yeah, you're going to get, it's a really cool thing if you think about it. Like everybody reads the same thing and that we all took something away from it differently. But yeah, you hit so many things too. So I could see how it could be more fun going back and read. I mean, with all of these things, if you have any kind of foreshadowing or anything, it's always so much fun and you get so much more out of it the second time you watch something or read something. I mean, Guardians of the Galaxy is a great example right now. It's like everyone wants to go back and watch and you didn't pick up all these things about, Rocket's PTSD. And now you're like, oh shit, that comment was way more important than we realized. So whether it's an indie comic or an MCU movie, if you loved it, read it again.
And speaking of Easter eggs, I didn't think about it. There's actually an Easter egg in issue 4 of
Alexa just told me that's not nice. I don't know what I did.
Sorry, it's taken over. No, I was saying there's a really cool little Easter egg in issue 4 of the Helix Project that announces the title of my next series, actually. And so that's pretty exciting. So that's something I guess people can look for in the way of Easter eggs. Nothing super Easter eggy in Minutes to Midnight, but
Pixar does that though. Like you see, like, what was it? Nemo was in Monsters Inc. And like, so they'll put Easter eggs for their future movies sometimes.
I gotta get like them, man. That's marketing to a whole nother level.
It is. So Trevor, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say thank you guys for like the thoughtful conversation, and thank you for reading my stories.
Of course, man. Thanks for sharing with us. Thanks for hitting us up. Let everybody know one more time where they can find you specifically and all your good works.
Thank you. So you can find me on pretty much any social, Pocket Watch Press, or because Twitter has limitations, it's P Watch Press. Those are all me. I run all of those accounts. And definitely check out the Kickstarter, The Minutes to Midnight, The Hour Between Life and Death. It is, the most ambitious thing I've ever done. I think personally, I think Reflections and Other Little Devils, which is the sort of premiere story in that, is the best thing I've ever written. I think it's my relationship with the artist who took over the End of the Helix Project operating on an entirely different level, because it's something that we were able to build together, whereas as grateful as I am, he came in toward the end of that story. We were able to do something now that has both of our artistic signatures very, very deeply involved. But I think anybody that wants digestibility, stories that have a definitive beginning, middle, and end, that are good on their own, I think this is great in a world where I think the comic book industry kind of demands all this crossover ability, which, it can sometimes hurt the individual stories themselves. So I think if somebody's just looking for good, thoughtful, experimental storytelling, that's something you can find. Plus, I'm working with some of the best young talent in the comic book industry from all around the world. I mean, you have talent on this book from the US, from Nigeria, from Mexico, Singapore, the UK, Brazil, for Montreal, and so you're getting storytelling perspectives and storytelling. So what I'm looking for, not ethics, but like the way they process, the way they tell stories. You're getting that on a global level, which I think really, really enriches the stories individually.
Yeah, definitely.
Which you can find the link to that in the link tree of all the socials as well. But you look up Minutes to Midnight, The Hour Between Life and Death. Yeah,
they'll be in the link for this episode as well. And again, thanks for hanging out, chatting with us. For everybody out there, make sure to not only follow Trevor, but as always, follow what we do. If this is your first time stumbling upon this, Hops Geek News, any podcasting platform, any social media. Support really great comic creators, help get the works out there. There's always a million different stories, a million different things, but find the ones that resonate with you. Support them, whether it's at the comic shop, whether it's at the Kickstarter, doesn't matter. Support them any way you can. So that way we can get continuous great art and stories and let people do it.
Don't let AI write your comics.
Yes. Or draw them.
Absolutely. Oh, God.
Oh, my
Absolutely
gosh.
That too. Absolutely that. So thanks for hanging out with us. We will catch you all next week. Trevor, one last time. Thanks, man.
It was a pleasure to be here, guys. Thank you so much.
We'll see you guys next week. Cheers.